Hello, today is Wednesday, July 7th, 2021. My name is Emily Ma, and I'm here with Dr. Lam Yu for the Houston Asian American Archive at Rice. And I'm also here with Yi Yang as a co-interviewer. So starting from the very beginning, when and where were you born?
I was born in Taisan, China, Guangdong, China, and that's in the south of China, pretty close to Hong Kong.
I see.
And
And
I was born in 1977.
okay, awesome. And what are some of the memories that you associate with the neighborhood that you grew up in?
So, so, so I didn't really grow up in the neighborhood that I was born in. I mean, my mom and I moved to Hong Kong when I guess my mom and my dad and I moved Hong Kong when I was two, so I don't really remember. So the neighborhood I grew up in Hong Kong is in a part of Hong Kong called Kwai Chung, is in the New Territory, which is north of the Kowloon Peninsula. Is is we live in a apartment high rise, so we live on the 18th floor. The neighborhood is pretty quiet. I guess in Hong Kong standard would be considered kind of suburban, but I mean, there's really, you know, it's Hong Kong, so it's still pretty dense. But it's a small neighborhood. There's a park right below the apartment building, and then it's a short walk to the elementary school that I went to, and also a short walk to the metro station. So,
Yeah, awesome. And do you have any like childhood hobbies that you like to do?
mainly, so in Hong Kong, I guess there was let's see, what did we do? There was a lot of time spent on schools. I think that like from elementary school on, you it's really critical for you to do well in school. So I spent a lot of time tutoring. But the When I was young, we go to the park and we hang out. I hang out with like the neighborhood kids. We run around. Um, and when I was in about first grade is when like Nintendo arrived in Hong Kong. So I used to go to my friend's house to play Nintendos. I didn't own a game system, so I just go to other people's places to play. There's also like little convenience store that have like video games console set up in the back, so you can go and play there too. So yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And so like a little bit about your parents. Could you tell me a bit about your parents' occupation?
So my dad works most of the time that that I've been alive. He's worked as a chef in a Chinese restaurant here in Houston. Um, so so when I was in Hong Kong with my mom, she when I was fairly little, she worked in a clothing factory that was owned by my uncle, and then when that closed, so the business went bust. I don't remember, like probably when I was in first or second grade, and then she just did sort of odd jobs. And then when we moved to Houston, the year less than a year after we moved, my brother was born. So my mom just stayed at home and raised the kids. Um, so she didn't really have job like a regular job until my brother and I basically moved out of the house, and then she worked a while for as a contractor for Medicare. She like goes and clean um, these older ladies' house, and she did that for several years. And now both my dad and my mom are retired.
I see. And how was like your relationship as a child with your parents? Like, what were some values that they emphasized when you were young?
Well, I really didn't know my dad. So my we moved to Hong Kong when we were 2, but then my dad went to Costa Rica to work when I was around 3. So I don't really remember anything about my dad until we were reunited when I'm like 10 and a half. So so for my mom, I guess, you know, being respectful, doing the right things, um, don't make a big scene, that sort of things. I mean, I guess, you know, there was a strong emphasis on doing well in school, but that's sort of I mean, I think that's, you know, she think that's important, but that's also a cultural thing in Hong Kong. Like I said, everyone I knew had, you know, go to extra tutors after school. So
Yeah, for sure. Do you think that you got like closer with your dad over time?
um, I would say probably closer than complete stranger, but we were never, I mean, we're never close in, you know, because, you know, I just didn't know him. And by the time I met him, I was already, you know, almost a teenager. So, and we have very different interests and different, you know, outlook in life. So we, yeah, we just how we are. So.
Yeah, I see. Um, and so in your household, did you grow up speaking Cantonese? And if so, do you still speak that now?
I speak Cantonese growing up. I guess my very first language, which I don't remember. Well, I guess my mom said she wanted me to speak Cantonese, but in Taisan they have their own dialect, which is slightly could be substantially different depending on what words you're saying, but is a sub dialect of Cantonese. So like in China, there's a lot of regional dialect within regions. So you know, people who live within probably, you know, 100 miles from each other could be incomprehensible if they were speaking their native dialect. So I spoke sort of that the Taiwanese dialect and Cantonese, but my mom said she emphasized the Cantonese dialect because it's just the more common dialect for where we live, or where we plan to live, I guess, in Hong Kong. So so yeah. So for my entire time in Hong Kong, I spoke only Cantonese. So when we moved to America, then I learned English. Um, I still speak Cantonese with my parents now, but my wife is American, and my kids, you know, they're a mixture of both. So my primary language is English.
I see. And were there any like traditional like holidays or cultural customs that you practiced growing up in Hong Kong?
Well, I guess Hong Kong has sort of a mixture of Buddhist and Taoist sort of popular religions that a lot of people practice. I would say, you know, we do ancestral worships. Like a lot of people, there is an altar to my grandfather, my maternal grandfather. So in Hong Kong, I live in an apartment with my mom and her mom, and occasionally one of my mom's brothers. Um, so there's a author and sort of a ancestral altar. There's the guardian and and the Buddha. So it's a mixture of that kind of things. And I remember like on certain religious or sort of holidays, we'll go to a temple. We we of course celebrate Chinese New Year's and all the major Chinese traditional holiday like the Mid Autumn Festival, the Dragon Boat Festival. So and then we go to clean the grave in the fall for yeah Chongyungjit for for my grandfather again. So that's sort of the extent of a religious practice. There's nothing formal.
I see. And I know like a lot of these practices involve food. Is there like a specific food that you miss a lot from home?
Well, I mean, having been, I mean, living in Houston, being the most diverse city in America, there isn't really any food that, you know, I I couldn't get from home. Um, yeah, I mean, there probably were food that I missed when I first moved here, but I don't really remember. So, I mean, yeah, my mom still makes the rice, sort of a Chinese version of the tamale quite often. That's sort of a fairly common like holiday food that you eat for New Year, you eat for the Dragon Boat Festival. But so yeah, I mean, I guess I miss sort of like having watching like a lot of people, like a lot of like my grandma and my mom and my aunts getting together and like making those. I mean, that's is really a communal endeavor. But like my mom just make it herself now. But that was nice. Um, I guess I do miss fresh food, fresh seafood. Because in Hong Kong, when I was growing up, we don't usually shop at the supermarket. I think that there was one nearby, but most of the time we shop for the protein and the vegetable in the open air market. So where you just, you wanted a chicken, you get a live chicken and they kill it, pocket it for you there. And then you go, to another stall and then you come back there, it's done. And then you wanted fish, there's a fish there. Is a lot of time they're either live or they would cut them down the middle. So they're they just lay out and their heart is still beating. So and like you wanted beef or pork, you go to the butcher and it's still the cow and they just chop off the bits. So I do miss that part about the food being like so fresh and so you really see the food that like I didn't I knew what my food looked like growing up as opposed to just like this package that you get from a grocery store.
Yeah, that's like the definition of fresh. um, so we would also like to know a bit about like the education system where you grew up. So what elementary school did you attend? Like what was the name of your school and like what was it like?
So I went to my education mainly in in Hong Kong. So I only stopped. I mean, I only went through the elementary school system. So I guess like I started in preschool. So like all the preschool in Hong Kong's, I think, are private. So like they're private schools. But almost everyone goes because education is so important. So I started in second grade. I mean, when I was 2, I started when I was 2. So then I was at one preschool and then it closed because being a private company, they not all of them make it. And then I went to a different one for I think 2 years, and then I started first grade. So in Hong Kong, I think it's still probably true now. Most of the secondary school, like elementary and middle and high school, government sponsor, but they are one different organizations. So most of them are some kind of religious affiliated. So I went to a Christian school. I think the name is like Hui Dai Tong, which is some person's name. I don't actually really know. So if I remember correctly, the way it works is for elementary school, the parents apply to different schools. So it's not like public school here where you have, you go to the school that is assigned to your house. So there were like maybe 3 elementary school that were sort of within walking distance from my house. So my mom would apply to them and then see which one accepts you. I'm not sure exactly what criteria they use to accept someone into first grade, but I guess they do it here too. So I went to this school, which is probably not, I think it's sort of in the middle, not like the very top school, but not the very worst. Like I said, it's a Christian's like organization that runs it. So is a morning and afternoon break. So like you can either go to school in the morning or you can go to school in the afternoon after lunch. So I was there for 4.5 years. So I always did the afternoon class. So yeah, so you start in first grade. I think I think there was like 7 periods. So you go there from, I think maybe 12:30 until 5:30. So like the entire afternoon. Um, so there's always, the curriculum always have Chinese, English, and math, and social study, and and Bible study. So I think those are the main subjects. I think there's like music and arts that you don't go to every day. So and there's so there's 2 recess break. Oh, and there's PE. And then I always think it's interesting, like so there's sort of this is really discipline oriented. So like every day in the beginning we would line up by class in the on the first floor of the school, which is just a big open area. And then that's where they give announcement, and like we do prayers. So being a Christian school, we do prayers in the beginning of the school, and you have to like line up really straight, and you have to you have um, you have to be on time. Like there's always these punishment for like stepping out line. So like if you're late, then they make you stand in the front of the hall so everyone can see you. And then after the announcement and the prayer, people go to their classes. You have to stay there until everyone's leave, and then the assistant principal would come and take your name down and then assign some kind of punishment. So I guess I was I'm old enough that it was still common practice to do corporal punishment in elementary school. But that's sort of for usually for higher infraction. But a lot of time you would lose your recess. So you would, instead of going to recess, you would stay in the room during recess time and do your homework or something. So punishment like that, sometimes they would make you write, I will not be late, or I will not do whatever you did 100 times. So I got that not quite a bit, but I figured out that you can use carbon paper. If you write, if they assign 100 times, you can write pretty big print 25 times, and you just use 2 carbon paper. If you're careful enough, they can't tell. So that was like a very, I guess I didn't know really at the time, but compared to the American education system is much more high pressure on the children. So you get, homework every night, and you get tested regularly, and then you get rank in your individual class, but you also get rank by your entire grade. So there's a lot of knowing where you are in the academic hierarchy, because everyone asks everyone else where you are, where you are. So, and then, and the parents get quite involved. And yeah, so, I was an okay student. I guess I would say I was pretty good. I would say I was probably in the top, I don't know, 10% maybe. So, but there was also a lot of busy work, I think. So which is probably true, across most elementary school, because, they're kids, you got to keep them occupied. So I remember in 3rd grade, I realized that my teacher probably are not really reading all the assignments she gave. So I remember for a period of time, so again, because of of how much emphasis in this in the education, my mom always make me do workbooks in the summer. So in the summer I just doodle and do whatever on the workbook. So for time in 3rd grade, I remember that I have all these scratch paper, and I get these assignments. So I would just do the first page, and I just staple a bunch of scratch paper that I'd done with whatever in the summer. And I never my teacher never mentioned it. So I assumed that my assumption is correct, that, they don't actually read it. So yeah, so I was fine academically. I was ranked pretty consistently in the top 3 or 4 within my class, and in the top 5 or so within my grade. So then we moved from Hong Kong to Houston when I was sort of most of the way through my 5th grade. So I didn't finish 5th grade, and then we moved. So that's all I can say about the Hong Kong system up until the middle of 5th grade.
I see. Yeah. I think compared to my own experiences just growing up completely in the American education system, that definitely sounds like a lot more intense than what I would be used to. But I like the carbon copy paper trick. That's pretty cool. So how did that academic pressure change once you came to America? Did you feel a big shift?
Well, so when I first came to America, we have English classes in school. When I was there, it was still a British colony. But I think they still take English in Hong Kong even now. But it's, it's kind of like taking Spanish here in elementary school. I mean, like I know certain words. I didn't know anything about grammar. So it was almost like from scratch to learn English. So when I first came here, my dad was working in this restaurant out in Clear Lake. So it's a fairly, I guess, a fairly affluent suburb. And I went to this elementary school that is really, looking back, is really sort of the, like Norman Rockwell, sort of like the, what people imagine like elementary American school in sort of in the 80s is like. So like, there was almost no diversity, and everything is very clean, and there was a ESL program, but the entire program from the entire school consisted of me and this other girl from probably Mexico. So that was the, the entire ESL class for the entire school. So there were really no expectation for me to do anything in the school. So, I mean, I show up and I remember the math was ridiculously easy. Like, so I came and they put me in fourth grade, like, because I was actually young for my age in Hong Kong, and being young, so they just go by the age. So then I was put in fourth grade, which is fine. I didn't speak English, so it doesn't really matter which grade I put in. So I remember the math was ridiculously simple. And I learned English by interacting with the kids and watching TV. I remember, like, it seems like we spent a lot of time watching The Little Mermaid. Like, whenever there was, like, I don't know what, I didn't understand, but like, I guess there were like some days where like there was no class material cover. So like we just watched, and they always show The Little Mermaid. I guess that was sort of the time when Little Mermaid just came into like VHS or something. So that was odd. I mean, in Hong Kong, we watch educational like TV occasionally, but like we never watch a movie in school. So I think most parents would think that would be a waste of time and their money. But I did remember it was odd that we were watching this same movie a lot. So yeah, and it was interesting. We have the school play. I participated. I just stood there. I think I play like a monk or something, like a missionary or something. But you just stand there. I mean, a lot of things I didn't quite understand, like Thanksgiving, and so I came like in '88, and we did like a mock election for the presidential election. It was Bush and Mondale. I don't even remember who I voted for. Not that it matters. So there were a lot of like activities that I was part of, because there wasn't like a really like an ESL class. So I just participated with everybody else. And on hindsight, I think that was good for integration, like as opposed to isolating you into like, a separate room somewhere and just with other people who are learning English. So I was there for 1 year, or not even, yeah, I guess 1 year. And then my dad got a different job on the other side of Houston, which is where I spend most of my time in Houston. So in the Spring Branch area. So then I moved, and then I was in fifth grade. to this other school, and is a completely different school. Like the demographic is extremely diverse. Like white was the minority uh, student body, and there was a lot more kids in the ESL program, and we have like kids from Laos, we have kids from Vietnam, there's me, there's like kids from Japan. So it was a completely different demographically school, and it's also a less wealthy area, and in the school just like we're like dirtier, and like everything's were like not as clean and new. So I was there for fifth grade. It was called Westview Elementary. I still pass it when I go see my parents for a year, and so it really gives sort of a me a sort of different view of like American educational system, and how different it is depending on the affluence of the neighborhoods. So like the one in Clear Lake, it was like right next to like a golf course. So I remember I would walk to and I would like cut through the golf course, and I see people hitting golf ball, and I didn't know what that was. It was just odd that these, really kind of older men were like hitting ball and like 7 o'clock in the morning. But the grass was always green. So like when I moved to Westview in the Spring Branch, it's really different feel. So yeah, so that's sort of my first 2 years of introduction to the America in the educational context. So like I guess that's, even at that point, I felt that it was odd that there was such a large difference in like financial supports for nominally both public schools. So
I see. So like the first elementary school you attended was like better maintained, but like the second one was more diverse. So like which one do you think you enjoyed better?
I mean, I don't know if I enjoy one more than the other. I mean, like it wasn't something that I particularly care about whether it was maintained or not. It was just something I noticed. I mean, as a kid, you just go wherever. So it was just different. Like the first school was just really insular, I feel, and the other one were more interesting. There's like more exciting, more fun. I mean, even though the kids were different. Like somehow the kids in the second schools all seem more mature and older than the kid from the first school. And I think being more insular have to do with it. Like in the first school, there were never any fight, but like in the second school, like there were several fights, and there was like always an exciting time for people. I think like I remember pretty vividly one time, like one of the Laotian kid got into a really big fight in the playground, and it was a big commotion. I don't even know what it was for, but and yeah, I mean, I feel as I guess as welcome in both school. So yeah, it's just I guess it's kind of like the difference between like living in I don't know like Cincinnati or some middle America city and living in New York City. It's just they're just different feel. So
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, did you have any like defining moments as you moved on to like middle or high school?
defining moment as I move on to middle and high school. Um, I mean, so I don't know if defining moment. So like when I moved from elementary school to middle school, um, the sixth grade is where like really they they separated out the ESL kids. Like in elementary school, I guess is they don't do that. But like in sixth grade, in the middle school, they would take all the students who are in ESL, and so we would go to the school that we assigned. Like I went to a school called Spring Woods Middle School, and then actually I went there. It was called junior high school, and then sort of toward the end they changed it to middle school. But anyway, so I would go to that school in the morning, and then after homeroom, I think, then all the ESL kids would go onto another bus, and then they ship us to a different school that is like, I think it's that building is sort of a mix. It used to be, I think that school used to be a high school, but it got too small. So for some reason they don't use it as a high school anymore. And and so that's where like they put the ESL kids, and that's where they put the disciplinary kids. So like there's where the kids who are like is sort of in between. They did something bad, but not bad enough that they're permanently suspended. So they would send them to that place. So there would be like multiple buses from all the schools, and they would have the ESL kids and the disciplinary kids come in the bus, and and that was kind of odd. I feel like and so so I did that for 1 year, and then I sort of graduated out of that scheme of things. So that was an extremely diverse population, right? So the entire school, student body of every class were people from other country. So I think, like I said, it's sort of, you know, in some way blocks the assimilation for some of the students. So because there would be student there that would be in that scheme for years, and they just sort of, like, I think it sort of helped that there weren't anybody else that speak Cantonese for me. Like, so there were like a lot of kids that spoke Spanish. So they just speak Spanish all the time. So they're, even though they're learning English in the class, every other interaction other than the one with the teacher, they were in Spanish. Whereas I have to communicate by English only. So I finished that scheme, and then in seventh grade I just have regular English class, and then I have one period that is with like advanced ESL. So I don't quite know why. I guess that's a transitional thing. So and then and then I did advanced ESL for a year, and then after that I was just normal curriculums. So so I guess I don't know if there's any defining moment, but it was certainly a transition in how how the school system organizes student that I noticed. That, I mean, it's it's kind of hard to miss, right? Because you ship everyone that is a particular characteristic off to a separate place away from the general population of students. So yeah, it's odd. But I guess it's not, given how America is, it's not surprising.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you for sharing. So would you say that you developed maybe like an interest in STEM or physics during your time in high school? Or like maybe even earlier than that?
I guess there's probably an interest in STEM. Yeah, probably in high school. Like, I don't really remember anything school wise um, in middle school. Um, I guess like my most like the teacher I was closest to in middle school was my American history teacher. So, and um, he was a good guy. But I did remember someone, maybe one of the science teacher mentioned like superconductors collider, because that was when like Texas was supposed to get this giant particle accelerator. I mean, I didn't know at the time what that is, but I didn't remember that. But I don't really recall anything science related really in middle school. So my ninth grade, I had like probably like one of the best biology high school teacher I ever encountered, and she got an award, and you know, that was a very nice class. So that was my first introduction to sort of STEM area in ninth grade biology, and she made everything really interesting. Remember, like dissect, cutting things up and like going to the zoo. And overall, it was just a really good class. I remember she had a teaching assistant at the time, and he would take time to like do side demonstration for kids who want to stay after. So I mean, I think it does have a lot to do with like the teacher that you happen to have, right? So that first year was where I thought like science was cool. Before, I really didn't thought much about anything. Like I said, my favorite subject was actually American history, but again, because that was my favorite teacher. So I think as a kid that you do conflate that a lot with like personality and interest. So 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 yeah, so I think that would be, just my ninth grade biology teacher.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, like that idea. And moving on to like the college admissions process, like why did you choose Trinity University to attend?
So so let's see. So I applied to not a whole lot of school. I know that probably sounds surprising for like the current cohort of students. I think like current cohort of students apply to like tons of schools. Um, and I think I only applied to 3 schools. I applied to UT, Trinity, and Rice. And and I didn't really want to go to UT because I didn't want to go to a really big school. And I got waitlisted for Rice, but now I teach there. So what do you know? Then so I only applied to 3 school, and I got accepted to 2 and waitlisted on the third one. So so then I went to Trinity. I mean, I guess if you just look at it that way, that seems straightforward. But why did I choose those 3 schools? So from high school, like from most of high school, I had a speech therapist that helped me with like just speaking English more clearly. And her son goes to Trinity. And when I was like in 11th grade, I was getting ready to apply. She offered to drive me to Trinity because she was going to visit her son. So we did like this, like visit. I just like, I'm sure a lot, you probably done with your school. So Trinity is really the only school I visited. And again, is because of a teacher. So that was the only school I was familiar with, and I was, comfortable with. Like I I stayed there overnight in, a dorm. It turns out like the guy I stayed with, he actually, one of the guys in the room, he was a physics major. So, so there's a lot of like personal connection to, what path you choose to go in life. Um, so that's why I chose Trinity. Also, I got mm, like it was like I said, my mom's didn't work. My dad worked in a Chinese restaurant, so it's like we we we're not well off. I guess I think I could have applied to free lunch for I probably qualify for free lunch, but like my mom always made me lunch, so I never like apply for it. So between need-based and merit-based scholarship, it was probably cheaper for me to go to Trinity than it was to go to UT. And I really didn't have that much loan. And then actually my sophomore year, I got this external scholarship. I got a Goldwater scholarship, which paid for the rest of the tuition. So like for my junior and senior year, I basically didn't have to pay anything, or I didn't have loan or anything. So financially, it also makes sense for me to go to Trinity.
Yeah, for sure. That sounds awesome. So what, like in Trinity, what were some extracurriculars or maybe like jobs or clubs that you attended?
So so I started at Trinity as an engineering major. And then I switched to physics my sophomore year, because it doesn't matter whether you're physics or engineer, everyone takes the same intro classes. Um, so, so like my social circle really is mainly around the physics department. I also have work study. So for several years, my freshman and sophomore, I think maybe junior year, I think it's just my freshman and sophomore year, I work in the library for interlibrary loan. And that was a nice job. People send in their requests by fax. I think they had also like an electronic system too, but like sometimes they would send it in by fax. And then you would take, a pile of the requests, and you go to the stack and you bring the book back. Sometimes they request like just a copy. So you would copy like 20 pages from a book, and then you send, you fax them back or you mail the book to them. So that was a really relaxing job, quiet. Sometimes I just, if there's an interesting book someone requested, I just read it for a while. And so but in the physics department at the time, it was sort of, I come at a time when we were ramping up with the physics club. So every physics department have a chapter, almost everyone have a chapter called SPS. So it's Society of Physics Students. So that's pretty common for all American university. So and the how active they are really depends on the student body. Like for example, Weiss version of SPS has been pretty low active for a while. But when I started in Trinity, that was when we were just happened with the cohort of students that were in the physics department at the time. They were just ramping up. So we did a lot of stuff, like a big thing we had was like, we have these physics t-shirt design every year, and we would, brainstorm about the design. And one of the student there, she's actually a returning student. So she's about maybe 10 or year older than everyone else. So her husband actually, she and her husband actually runs a small t-shirt business. So I think that was sort of also why we were so into making physics t-shirt, because she was like, um, so we would sell these t-shirts. We have different events. We promote the t-shirts. So a lot of things like, sort of revolve around like doing the t-shirt things. And then we have sort of like physics events, and I help organize those things. And of course, we also spend a lot of time just doing homework. So there was like this computer lounge where I would say I spend majority of my time at Trinity in the computer lounge, where I was, either on the computer trying to get something to run, or like working on homework problems. So yeah, so there were a lot of just, camaraderie in the program. And we have softball games, and I think like my junior and senior year, we have weekly, on Saturday morning, we would have flag football with the math department. So it was like a lot of the physics undergraduate, Trinity is a primarily undergraduate institution. So like there's very few graduate students. They're in like urban study or something. But so it'll be the physics students, and then the math students and the math faculty. So that was like a lot of fun, just playing flag football with the math faculties, because as a physics major you also take a lot of math. So like I had classes with all the faculty that I was playing flag football with. The physics faculty never joined. None of them were particularly athletic. So, but like at that time, they hired two new faculty in the math department. They were pretty relatively young. They were probably in their early 30s, and they were really into sports. So we would play flag football, and we'll play soccer sometime. And occasionally the math faculty would like get one of their like calculus student who's on the football team to come and play. And that was interesting, because like, we're just a bunch of like physics and math, not to, generalize, but for the most part, we're not like overly athletic. And I remember I was covering this guy who's in the football team, and I was covering him, and he was running, and I'm running toward him. He caught the ball and he shifted direction, and I couldn't, like, I was just shocked. I didn't know people could change direction that fast. Like, she shifted and I was still moving the same direction I was. I was like, so that was unfair, but it was fun.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. And are you still in touch with like any of your friends from college?
Yeah, some of them. My roommates for my first 3 years. So actually, like, I stay on campus all 4 years. Some people leave, but like I said, I have like scholarships, so I didn't have to pay. So there wasn't like, I didn't need to save money on the housing. So for the first 3 years, I had the same roommate, which also was someone I knew from high school. So when I was going to Trinity, I knew that this other guy was going to Trinity, and it was like, so we weren't like great friends at the time, but we knew each other. He didn't bother me, so I was like, let's room together, and it worked out. And then the senior year, he moved on off campus, so I just have some random guy who was actually interesting. His dad turned out to be a physicist, but he was an accountant or something. But so I stay in touch with my roommate for, because we really knew each other for a long time. I was one of the groomsmen at his wedding. He was one of my groomsmen at my wedding. So, and he and his wife now lives in Denver. Um, and also another friend of mine, um, Tim. So Tim and I, so I was a sophomore when Tim was applying. So we're 2 years difference. But I was the first person that Tim met at Trinity when he came to visit, at least in the physics department. And 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 so I came to Weiss for PhD. Tim came to Weiss at PhD. So we really like track each other. And then Tim's advisor moved to Dartmouth, maybe 3 years into his PhD. So he moved to Dartmouth. Um, and then I and and then we were at different places. I graduated, and then I did a postdoc. But Tim, in the meantime, have came back to Weiss to work in a position that eventually I would take. And then he transitioned to a different job. So he's still working at Weiss. And then I came back to Weiss, and then I took the job, and then now I'm in a different job. So so Tim and I really we kid that we known each other. At some point, we known each other half of our lives, but now we known each other most of our life. And so he's I'm actually his son's godfather. So so yeah, and then so yeah, so those are two main people that I still really much keep in touch with from Trinity. I still keep in touch with the lady were that has the T-shirt business. So her name's Lois, and she's amazing. So she's one of those people that have to have 20 different things going on at the same time. And so she was running, when we were in Trinity, she was going to college, she was running a small business, and she was working at a country store, because she and her husband live way out. Her commute is ridiculous, an hour or an hour and a half. And she did 3 majors. She did physics, chemistry, and business. And I know it's and then after she graduated, she started working at this semiconductor plant. So she was a quality control manager, and then and she stayed in the company. This company changed owner, but she stayed in the same company as they got bought or so. And now she's still an engineer there. But in the meantime, she had bought the country's grocery store that she used to work at. So now she owned the grocery store. And then they live out in the country. So they I guess mainly her husband have started a small farm. Because she owned the grocery store, and the grocery store out in the country is also the post office. So someone have shifted some heritage duck chicks, and they didn't claim it or something. So they took it home, and then they started raising chickens. And so yeah, so the last time I talked to Lois, she was thinking of she bought the land across the road from the country store, and she's gonna develop it into a restaurant. I mean, this is just she have to have so many things going on at the same time. So yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like she's just doing it all. Yeah, that's very impressive. So what inspired you to pursue not only physics, but also a career path in education in physics?
So like I said, I started off in engineering. So so I remember like it was engineering was interesting, but it seems like my engineering, I mean, it probably changed, but like it probably gotten better as I progressed through the program. But I remember like thinking my freshman year, the engineering like classes were, the problems that we do were very like monotonous. They were all very like similar to each other. And I think, I mean, I guess maybe that is a hallmark of engineering education. You sort of like look at all variation of some system. I just didn't, it just didn't click that I didn't really want to do that. My physics class were more varied because it's, you know, like, I mean, I understand it now, right? Because is sort of like introductory physics. So you try to cover as many things as possible. And I thought that was more interesting because you know, you go from like electricity, you go to optics, and you go to like mechanics, you build stuff. So I thought that was more fun. And I also remember like I have an engineering professor my freshman year, and he's a nice guy. He used to be a colonel in the Air Force, and he was. I remember talking to him like with a group of students about like, you know, engineering, like what major to pursue, and he said like, well, you should, you know, everyone, you know, all of you should be engineers. You should be a mechanical engineer because that's what he was, because you get to build stuff and like, you know, he has this big, you know, things. I guess this speech he'd always give, and 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 then he's like, you know, and I don't know, like he's, maybe I asked him about physics, and he's like, well, no one should, you know, you shouldn't major in physics unless you want to teach high school. And I remember that sort of rubbed me the wrong way, and that's also contributed to why I didn't keep on engineering. So so yeah, so then that's why, you know, both because I thought physics were interesting, and I guess that conversation stuck with me as like I don't like that dismissiveness. So I decided to be a physics major in my sophomore year, and I think like I said, like the reason why I pursue it, just like the reason why I started, is I just think it's interesting. It's a lot of fun. There's so many different things you can, you know, with really the same set of tool. Like a lot of things in physics across seemingly really different area. It could be like biology or like computer chips. And you really use the same you can use a similar mathematical tool to understand them. You just sort of have to look at them in a different angle. And I thought that was just the neatest thing because, you know, there's some uniting thread between everything. Like it gives sort of I think a psychological comfort to know that, you know, somehow everything could be make to make sense, at least in some way. I mean, obviously the world is the world. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason to most things, but how you perceive it could give you a sort of meta organization that you can impose on the world to sort of help you navigate it. So yeah, I mean, like I don't know, like I never subscribed to the idea. I think a lot of people studying physics feel like this is the pursuit of truth. I never really thought that was the case. I just thought it was just neat to be able to describe things. Um, so, and you know, I still don't believe that this is the truth. I mean, I don't think. Anyway, so I thought my education in Trinity was great. I mean, like it was a small program, everyone know everybody, and you just go to the professors anytime, and you like, you know, you have a question, you sit down, you talk, and then sometimes it has to do with the class, sometimes you just ask something you heard on the news, and I did research with one of the professor there. I actually did radio astronomy. Um, it was interesting. You spend a lot of time on the computer, which I think also, I mean, it was interesting, but also made me not want to pursue that. So that's the value in sort of doing research as an undergraduate. You know, maybe you find like what you really love, but also it helped you find what you don't actually want to do. So then, yeah, so I finished my physics program, and despite what like a lot of physics like department claim, there really isn't that much to do with a physics bachelor degree. And I mean, I think there might be more now, uh, with like more IT type, computer type things. But when I graduated, there weren't like a lot of like things that I think would be interesting for me to pursue that wouldn't require me to go to graduate school. So, and I really didn't plan on not going to graduate school. So that works out. So I applied to graduate school. Again, I didn't apply to that many. I applied to, again, I think I applied to three. I applied to UT Austin. I applied to Rice, and I applied to University of Maryland. And they were all great programs. I guess having been to the small school, I kind of wanted to try bigger schools. So that's why I applied to UT and University of Maryland. So I got accepted to UT and Rice this time. Didn't get waitlisted. Actually, I sent in my application to Rice on like Friday, and I got my acceptance on like Monday. So I was like, that made me feel good. And I didn't get accepted to Maryland. Though I did get a job interview later on. So again, what do you know? So again, it was between Rice and UT, and I actually did went to UT to visit this time to just talk to people, and I think it would have been a good program, but I also came to Rice, and I did like Rice better. So that was more of I guess the graduate school decision was more of a rational decision than my undergraduate decision. That, in undergraduate, I just didn't want to go to a big school. But this time I actually, weighted the differences. And I just thought the research at Rice were more interesting, for what I was, what I wanted to do. And so I came to Rice. Um, so, so for the most part, I think, um, throughout graduate school, my plan was to be a tenure faculty. I think that's sort of the plan. So, and there I didn't really do a lot of teaching. There was some like lab teaching assistant requirement for the graduate program, but that's fairly minimal. And I didn't really pursue it, unless, except for one time. I was asked by one of the faculty that was teaching solid state physics if I would take his class. So this faculty, he travels a lot. So like, a lot of time he would ask his postdoc or his graduate student help. But that one day, I guess his graduate student and postdoc were doing something else. So he asked me to help, and I thought, well, yeah, sure, I try it. And I spent like quite a bit of time preparing it, and I taught the class, and I thought it was a good experience. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the preparation, and I enjoyed, giving the lecture. And so then I follow, sort of the normal trajectory when you want to be a tenure faculty is you do a postdoc. So I went to do a postdoc at a national lab, so at Maryland, and there was no teaching, there. You just work for the government, and that was a great experience. I was able to be much more independent, and I got some fairly nice work done and published in fairly good journals. And then I got a tenure track job at University of Memphis after my postdoc. And, so that's the tenure track position. But I guess never having taught in a state school, I didn't quite understand like the expectation. So when I went to Memphis, they were like, so they gave me the first semester off of teaching. So as I was setting up lab, which was actually great. Not so great was that they didn't give me enough, the money that I was supposed to get. So it's kind of like hard to set up a lab when you don't have the money that they promised you. But so then I start teaching my second semester there, and I really did enjoy teaching. And I was teaching 2 classes a semester, and then I was teaching summer school to supplement my income, and that's when I had the most teaching, and that's where I sort of developed as a teacher. And because I taught this is not a good way to develop your junior faculty, but like when I was in Memphis, anytime anybody was on sabbatical, they assigned me to teach their class. So I wound up having to write new class, like you have to develop a class, like you can't just, walk in, like, so I was constantly having to develop new curriculum, new classes. But what it got me was that like, I basically taught the entire undergraduate curriculum in the physics program. And then I got married, and then I was expecting my firstborn. And I look around and like, I really don't picture myself raising a family in Memphis. I mean, like the job was okay. And I think I probably would have been able to squeeze by and get tenure. I gotten some grant and some publication, but like Memphis is a very segregated city. Like it's just a really strange environment. Like you have people that grew up in Memphis and never stray away from basically like north and south of the Central Row, because that's where the white population lives. And, I remember talking to the lady and like, there's like this international grocery store that's several rows south of the Central Row. And she's like, I've never been there. I've never been down to that row that you, and she lived in Memphis like most of her life. So, I mean, the people I met in Memphis are great, but I just don't see myself raising a family there. And then when there was a position that opened up at Rice, is a teaching position. So it's no longer a tenure track position, but is a solely teaching position. And I was like, oh, I like it. I want to do it. So then I came to Rice, and then, yeah, I mean, like it was like the first position I got was actually a temporary position. And I, in some ways, just take a leap of faith. In some ways, it's kind of odd for someone to take a tenure track faculty position and leave it for basically a 2-year job. But I was like, I think I could make it work. And it has. I'm still here after 9 years. And now I have, not a tenure faculty position, but is, a permanent position, as permanent as any other job outside of tenure could be. So.
Right. And as like a physics professor, what is it like to interact with students who might be pursuing like a future career path that's similar to yours? And do you see like a part of yourself within them?
So I guess I'll answer that a little bit by going back to how I taught classes when I started teaching at Memphis. So like when I started teaching in Memphis, my idea was like, okay, I'm going to think back on all the good things that I got from my teacher in undergrad. And I'm going to think back and like all the things I wish they have done differently. And I'll just do that. And I did that for a while. And then I realized that that's not really a great way to teach because it's really self-centered and it's like I'm trying to teach to myself and like and that's not, you know, that doesn't address inclusiveness, it doesn't address diversity. It's just like, you know, like if I'm sitting in that room, this is how I want to be taught. So everything is about me. And over time, I kind of like evolve away from that. And I think, you know, what would be the best for this student? What would be the best for this group of students? And so that's how I sort of have approached teaching as I evolve as a teacher. And like, and that's how I talk to students. Like, you know, I don't, like if students interested in physics, you know, I don't like, so you have to follow this path. It's, you know, it's like, what is it that you really want to do? Like, do you want to be a tenure faculty? Do you want to work, you know, in a research lab? Like, there's different things we could talk about. Like, you know, just sometimes it's just like, is this really what you want to do? Or is it something that, you know, you thought you wanted to do, but have you thought it through? And so, yeah, so I guess it helps as a teacher to not to move away from yourself and try to sort of think about the people that you, the student that you're actually talking to. I think like as when I first started teaching, I just imagined every student I'm talking to is just a younger version of me, which is probably not the case 99.9% of the time. So.
Yeah. And so like in your classes, have you also noticed any like disparities between the number of like male or female students or the number of Asian and non-Asian students?
It has gotten better. I think the ratio actually close to 50-50, at least in the intro class, than just when I started, which is not that long ago. I mean, on the grand scheme of thing. I mean, I started, you know, teaching at Rice 9 years ago. And I think the disparity between the gender, the male and female split, you know, have gotten much closer to 50-50. I mean, I think in the biology, the class that's tailored for bio majors and pre-meds, is actually predominantly female now, because majority of medical students are now female. As far as like Asians and non-Asian, I guess I haven't seen a shift. I mean, like, I think the proportion of Asian student in my class is commensurate with the proportion of Asian student at Rice. So, I mean, so it's, you know, it's higher than the general population, but, you know, it's not the majority. So, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And like from interacting with your own students, have you learned anything about like any differences between students nowadays versus in your own college years?
I mean, I think like, I think at the core of it, students are still the same. I mean, I feel like, you know, there's different like technology. Like, you know, when I was going to school, like we just started to have internet. well, maybe not. I mean, we have email, but it was email on like this sort of like command line email. Like it's like you log on to this terminal and it's like everything is green. And there, you know, there was no Facebook, there was no social media. It was, you know, people, you make friends by just, you know, meeting people in person. Like, I guess Facebook came out probably like my senior year and like during my graduate school. I mean, I remember when I joined Facebook, uh, it was still exclusive. It was still like you have to have either an Ivy League email address or some scattering of school. Like Rice was one of them after they expanded out of the Ivy League. So like my college year predate, you know, the widespread like social media. But I think, I mean, I feel that the students are not that different internally. I mean, they, you know, they meet friends differently, they interact with each other differently, but, you know, they still, you know, study the same way, they still procrastinate the same way, they still have the same stress level. I mean, I feel like it's much more acceptable now to talk openly about like mental issues and like how stressed you are, and 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 not boast about how many nights you stay up. I mean, I think that's probably, people still do all those things. They still cover up, you know, their mental issues, and they still boast about like staying up 5 nights, you know, to finish this project. Um, so, so, but you know, it's more acceptable now to talk about, you know, going to a therapist or going to counselors. But again, the people haven't changed. Like when I was going to school, there's, you know, their classmates that have mental illness. They just didn't address them. So, so I guess in that respect, it's better. It could still be better. I think. You know, um, I mean, certainly this past year haven't helped anybody on the mental health issues. So yeah, so overall, I think it's probably the same for things that are important.
Yeah, I see. And also, like, how have you found the best way to inspire your own students, um, like especially those pursuing physics?
Best inspires. I mean, I feel like each student is different. I mean, like, and and as a teacher, there's there's not some like magical thing that you say. Like I sort of like, sometimes I talk to other people about teaching, and like I feel like sometimes people have this sort of magical phrase fallacy. They think that like you're teaching something, if you just say this magical phrase, everyone will understand it. No matter what you know, you could be teaching quantum mechanics. If you just say this topic in this magical way, then like everyone, well, of course that's not true. Like everyone learned different way and different things. So I don't like, I guess my answer is I don't really know what inspires students. Because like looking back, I don't really know what inspired me. I mean, it's not like one thing. It's just, you know, I think, you know, trying to teach the material well is the best I could do. I mean, like, so yeah, I mean, you can connect things together, which is what I think is the most interesting part of physics. Like, you know, you had some, you're talking about a certain thing and then you jump to a different topic and then you say, but wait, you can like look at it the same, the two things, and they're actually the same. Like the classical, like the thing that you would do like in introductory physics is to sort of show that like things that are moving in circle and move things that are oscillating back and forth are actually mathematically equivalent if you just look at it in the right way. So that's kind of neat because, you know, and initially when you look at it, just looking at something going in circle and something going back and forth, they don't seem to be the same. And there's a lot of that in physics that you can sort of tease out. I mean, I try to do that to some extent, but since I teach the intro class, there's just a lot of material to cram in to a very short amount of time. So for the most part, I just try to make things clear to students. And like, I try to introduce things that are sort of extracurricular to show students there's more to physics than the stuff that we do. Because like in intro physics, like students don't realize it for the most part when they're taking it, but if they progress through like engineering and physics, I think they often look back in intro physics is that intro physics actually is not, there's not much there. There's not much like challenging things in intro physics. Of course, most students would disagree that it is quite challenging when they're going through it. But for the most part, intro physics is really about following, in some ways, following instruction. Like you read a problem and there's a certain way you interpret that word, those words, and you translate it into a picture, and then you translate the picture into an equation, and then you use, you know, just algebra or sometimes calculus, and you turn the crank. So a lot of physics, intro physics is at its core descriptive. Even though you're solving a problem, all that really require you is to do a translation from words to a picture. So I always recommend students actually draw a physical picture, but that seems to be a loose cause. Students just don't like to draw pictures. They want to go straight to an equation, which is I think it misses the point. But like, so a lot of intro physics, and in some sense, a lot of what you do as an undergraduate in science is just learning that translation. And it's not that interesting when you think about it. Like, you know, if you're learning, you know, a foreign language, if all the time you do are just translating words without actually like speaking to people, it's not really that fun. So I try to sort of add extra stuff to the curriculum to sort of show that like physics is not just doing this sort of translation over and over again. Like, you know, I think like, you know, in the old day when people like would translate, you know, Julius Caesar and Cicero from Latin, and it's like, I mean, you need to do it. You need to learn, if you're gonna, you know, learn Latin, you need to do it. You need to do physics or engineering, you need to learn it. But that's not what's fun about physics. That's not what's interesting about engineering. It's just, this is what you need to be able to do to get to the fun and interesting things.
Right, yeah, that makes sense. And also with like technology advancing so much, have you found that you've got the opportunity to work together with other departments at Rice, or maybe even other universities or industries?
I mean, I guess I benefit a lot in how I think about teaching from my interaction with the biology, the teaching faculties in the bioscience department. Because like bioscience have like their department as a whole, but also like their core teaching faculty have been thinking much more deeply, and they've been engaging with the student and the curriculum a lot longer than physics. Like, you know, they've been doing it 10 plus years. Whereas, in physics, we just sort of been just start and stop and really haven't really progressed as much as the bioscience department. So I benefit a lot from just talking and just understanding how they teach their classes in the bioscience department. Yeah, and I talked to some colleagues in the engineering departments, but not to the same extent as the bioscience. And just to get a sense of how different department teaches classes. So, I mean, though I don't know really technology have to do with it. It's just you you give an opportunity to interact with people, and then you sort of take it. I mean, there are more this past year, I guess, because of everyone's on Zoom. The department has, been on more sort of what the National Physics sort of organization to learn more about inclusivity and diversity. And that have been helpful to just get more voices into the conversation. So I think that is actually helpful to, with Zoom is a lot easier to just, hear what other people have said and just, attend a panel with, 5, 8 experts on the topic. Like back before Zoom or before everyone did Zoom, you to really, learn about these things, you have to sort of actively travel to places. So it really lowered the barrier for people to learn about inclusivity and diversity. Because I think before this last year, these are not inclusive, like diversity issues were thought to be important, but not something that people actively try to pursue. I mean, I'm not, that's not just an indictment to like physics department. I think that's in general across, the country. So I think, that helps, that have technology have helped with that respect.
I see. And like on the topic of diversity, being an Asian American yourself, have you ever experienced any instances of discrimination as a Chinese American professor?
No, I mean, I don't think so. As a faculty, I don't. I mean, the university environment is, in certain respect, it's very insular. I mean, in certain respect, it's not. I mean, students still get exposed to all sorts of things here as they would any other environment, and the faculty as well. But being at Rice or even being in Memphis, I have not felt that being Asians were in any way an impediment or having felt like discriminated against. But having said that, I guess it's a little odd being Asian in America, in that a lot of things you internalize how the culture is. And like, it really takes someone else to look at the situation to tell whether it is discriminatory or not. And I feel the same way when I'm talking with my friend who's Black. He talked about, things that happen. He's also a physics faculty. And I was like, that's racist. And he's like, really? Yeah. So I feel like, when you're in it, in that particular situation, being who you are and having grown up in the culture, it's hard to like really like, unless someone just come out and use a racial slur, you kind of like it doesn't register. So as far as I could, I consciously notice I have not been discriminated against as a faculty.
I see, yeah. And that's also a really good point, like about the internalization. So more about Rice. When did you become a head residential associate at Hansen?
Well, technically, I became the head associate, residential associate on July 1st. So, so I have not actually done anything. I haven't even moved in, but yes.
I see. What are you like looking forward to the most about being in this role?
I mean, just interacting with the students and seeing how my family interact with the students and just being helpful. I mean, like when I was interviewing for the position, like they asked like, why do you want to do this? And I guess I feel like I see the student sort of on only one side of their life, like the academic side. And I feel like, that I could be useful on the other side, where like with more like mental supports or just, mentoring that outside of like academic. So, so, so I guess I want to be sort of a complete package for the student as opposed to just on the academic side. So that's what I'm looking forward to, is to sort of expand my mentorship to students if they wanted to, to fill out that part of their lives.
Yeah, that's really good. And so as an RA, like you'll be living with your family like on campus. So could you tell me a bit about like your parenting philosophy?
So I think my parenting philosophy is I I like my children to question things. So I think in some way I pursue that to the so then but I don't discipline them as much as maybe, I mean, certainly not as much as my mom did. But I don't know, like I really want them to be questioning people. So sometime like you know, if they do certain thing that, or they try to do something that I know doesn't work, or if they could probably break something, as long as it's safe, I sort of stand back and let them do it. And then I try to explain to them why it didn't work if it doesn't work. And I try to make it as low pressure for them as possible, and like, that they don't feel like they need to be afraid of trying things and trying new things. And yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, they're pretty open to things. I mean, there's sort of, different different people have different personalities. So I think like, one of my kids might be more timid than the other one. Um, so, so I guess, I mean, certainly I want them to be kind and loving. So, so I guess when I first was planning to be a parent, and then now that I'm a parent 3 times, uh, it's I want my children to know that they are loved. I think that's ultimately what I want. That's my principle, if there is one. So that like they 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 don't need to be. I don't. I don't think they need to be happy all the time because that's oppressive. I don't think they need to, love everyone because no one can love everyone, but they should at least like everyone or at least tolerate people. But I want them to always feel that like my wife and I love them no matter what, unconditionally. Um, and I want them to explore what they're interested in, trying new things. And I mean, that's ideal. That's what I mean. And of course, in practice, I don't know, how well that works for them. Of course, they're still relatively young. I mean, there's certain thing with my kids, I feel like, why are they fearful of failure, for example? Like, we never penalize them for failure. But I think part of it is that's just human nature. You don't like to have things that you want to do be not working out. So that's something that like I, my wife and I, try to work on is like how to get our kids to not be afraid to fail and also not be, self-centered, arrogant people. I mean, I think that's sort of a fine line. I mean, if you're a complete narcissist, then you by definition never fail because if you fail, you just rationalize it. But that's not what we want. Right? We want our kids to to explore things and not fear failures, but when they fail, that they learn from it. And I think, by showing them unconditional love, we try to help them achieve that. I think that's sort of our philosophy in raising our kids, but you know, that's not always how it works out in practice, but that's what we want.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great like balance to strive for. And so personally, like what else do you like to do outside of work? Like any hobbies or interests like that?
So, I mean, with 3 kids, I think most of your time outside of work are with the kids. So like I read a lot. At least I used to read a lot. Now I read. Now I listen to audiobooks when I'm putting my kids to sleep, and I also listen to podcasts. So a lot of things that you can do while you're doing something else with your kids is what my hobbies come out to be. I mean, like my wife likes and I likes to eat different food. So being in Houston, that's a great city to be in. I mean, even over the last year, we order out, I guess, probably once a week, just to to have some interaction, even if is at a distance. You still like go in and grab your food and go. Um, so so we liked to. I mean, we both like traveling. Of course, we haven't traveled for the last years, but like everybody else, and with little kids, it's harder to travel, but we do enjoy traveling. So yeah, I mean, like when my kids were younger, I used to like have these little electronic projects that I would get into and like just sort of nerdy thing, like installing some different operating system on your computer just for the heck of it, and just messing around, like making a web server and things that like you can look up on the internet and then you can sort of play around with. So um yeah, I mean, so yeah, I guess that's sort of the extent of outside work.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing. And so our last segment of the interview is kind of focused on COVID-19. Um,
Hmm.
so how has the pandemic like personally changed your life?
It given me a whole lot more time with my family. which is, I think, is a plus. So, so, I mean, like, part of, not the main motivation, but certainly a contributing factor for us applying to be Army is we live pretty far out in the suburb from the city. So my commute to school is usually an hour. So that's 2 hours that, just in commuting every day when I was in person. And so that, so of course now that we're going to be living on campus, there's no commute. So I think, like, again, with parenting, I think a lot of it is just being there. Just like, I think I mean, that's true for a lot of things. With your job, with being an RA, being a parent, a lot of it is just being physically present for, for whoever you're doing it for your boss, for your, for the student, for your kids. So I think that has positively contributed to, like, and yeah, I mean, I think certainly, is odd year for my kids. They so we tried so my son would have started kindergarten, and my daughter would have started in third grade in the fall of 2020. We tried the public school homeschool, the public school online for a week, and it was impossible to do online school with a kindergartner, because if you cannot read, you cannot really interact like on the computer. It really required either my wife or I sitting right next to him the entire school day. So we took them out of public school after 1 week. I don't think we even lasted 1 week, several days. And then we just homeschool them. And I think that also have been great academically for my kids. So actually my wife homeschooled them. I support, but like she's the one that really went all in with developing the curriculum, figuring out everything. And I think they have progressed probably to grade level over the last year by homeschooling. So I think it has wear on them sort of mentally to be so isolated for last year. So that's a minus, certainly. So there's just I feel like there's more conflict, like just sort of interpersonal conflict with each other, just because you've been sort of trapped with the same people for a year. So hopefully this coming fall, when they go back to like school, that will alleviate some of the tension that sort of have built up the last year. So I feel like my wife and I have been close. We always been close, and now I don't have to leave. It's actually been great. I guess if you really love the person, you would. Being in quarantine is actually pretty good. So I think, to me at this moment in time, I feel like overall it's been a plus for me and my family. But of course, who knows looking back, in a year and 2 years, what the repercussion is, because it's really, no one really know what it does to a person or as a society to have everyone sort of like living in, well, a lot of people living in fear and sort of be locked in for a year. And so, but that's sort of a natural experiment. We have to see how it works out. So, also have worked out for us financially as a family with all the, because, I kept my job, actually got a promotion. And then there's also all the extra money from the relief fund. So yeah, we are, at least on paper, I think we work. It was a plus for our family in a lot of way, which of course is not the case for a lot of family. So we're of course thankful for that.
Yeah, it's great that you were able to find some like optimistic aspects in the pandemic. So like as a professor teaching on Zoom, like what do you think are some pros and cons of like this new format?
So I think the con is a lot of like students who are not inclined to interact with each other are even less inclined to interact with each other. And I think, which is sort of it's bad because learning is really a social dynamic, like is learning. I feel that learning is a communal experience in that like you really work off of each other when you're learning. I mean, there's an individual aspect of it, like where you just sit and like read the book and do the homework. But a lot of like learning new things really, I feel most effective when you are in a study group or you're interacting with each other in class. And I feel like that for students who are more introverted or less inclined to interact with other students, this year on Zoom just make everything, worse for them academically. So, and I think for certain students, I think it, you know, they they still manage to find study groups and they still manage to make friends over Zoom. And of course, like I said before, who knows what the long-term repercussion of being sort of just isolated physically is. But I think for that segment of student, it was fine. I mean, the positive aspect I feel like is that if students so inclined, I think like the lectures are in some way clearer and better because I pre-recorded them. So I have time to actually plan everything I say, and if I don't like what I'm saying, I could re-record them. So they're not like, it's not the best you can do, but probably better explanation than I would do in a normal one-off lecture, because like sometimes you sort of like you say something and then like a minute later it's like, I wish I take it, I took that back because now it's going to be confusing to everyone. And then, but then if you go back, then like it's even more confusing. But of course there's a lot of like, the lectures only are helpful if students actually watch them. Of course, that's true for in person. They have to attend the class. But I think overall it's a plus for students who are inclined to watch the video lectures, because then they get a better version of it than I would normally give, just because of, I'm able to correct things and go back and make changes. And also they're able to, stop in the middle and then could go back and rewind and watch it over if there's something that they understand. I mean, that again work for certain students. Some students really want like instant explanation. Like if something they don't understand, they want like raise their hand, and that's sort of, I try to have that aspect as well in my class. So like there's recorded lectures and then there's there's Zoom meetings. But I try to, I only do that for my lecture. Well, I guess I do that twice. Like, I guess yeah. So the complaint of the student is now, they're in class twice the time that they would. Like, but, and I guess my response would be, though no one actually say that, to ask tell me that directly, but if they have, my response is like, technically you don't have to do any of it. You can just do whichever makes sense to you. Now, if doing all of those things actually help you, then maybe that's what we should be doing even in person, that you should spend the time watching the video, like maybe reading the textbook. So, I mean, like academically, I really don't see any change for my class. So like I do the majority of the question, like the exam questions and like the pledge assignments, I make them myself for the most part. Like I would say for the fall semester is probably 99% of it. For the spring semester is more like 60% of it. But so I haven't, so I didn't make any of the problem easier or harder, obviously. And it's really the same kind of problem that I always give. Of course, they vary from year to year because it's, you can't give the same problem every year. Also, it'd be boring for me to not. Anyway, so the point is that the student grade haven't changed. So like, sometimes people like are concerned about cheating. And I was like, I don't really see it. I mean, if they were cheating, then they're not cheating any more than they have before. And I mean, you probably laugh at like some of the exam grade put quite low, but so if they're cheating, they're really doing a poor job of cheating in general. So I think like for most part, academically, at least for our student, I know it's probably different for like students in community college and like different school, but for our students that I interact with, I think on the whole, they have not suffered academically in my class.
Yeah, those are all really good points. And also this year, we've seen like a huge spike in Asian hate crimes, in part due to like a xenophobic narrative surrounding COVID-19. So what is like your personal take on that situation?
I mean, I feel that xenophobia is ever present in like a pluralistic society, and is like I said before, like being in a university setting and being in quarantine, I really haven't personally experienced it. But that doesn't say anything about anybody else's experience. And I know, I mean, I don't really know like whether it is more pervasive now than before the pandemic, or is it just more like reported on in some way? I mean, like, the United States have a long history of xenophobia against Asian people, all the way back to, I mean, basically, as soon as there's enough Asian people for them to feel threatened, then there's been xenophobia against Asian people. Like, there's the Chinese Exclusion Act, there's coders on immigrations, and there is certainly unequal punishment for crime against Asian versus white, but of course, that's also true for other ethnic groups. So in the larger context of things, I feel like that the Asian hate crime probably may have increased, but I think it's just more visible. So, and I mean, I guess hate crime is bad, and any sort of discrimination is bad, but visibility is good. Transparency is good. So if people see that there is xenophobia. If someone who lives in middle America who has, really no interaction with Asian, see that Asian hate crime is a problem in this country, I think overall that is good for the health of the republic. Just because this country, go back to when I was talking about Memphis, or even like the university environment is, is a pluralistic society, multicultural, but the tendency is to cluster around your own. So is really a missed opportunity for such a vibrant society to not take advantage of all the resources of human resources that we have, just to, not even in a capitalistic way, just be better people, just to learn from each other and just understand how different people live. And of course, there's a fringe benefit. I think there actually are financial benefits to society as a whole to take advantage of all the human resources that this country has. So, yeah, America is a nation of great potential, I would say.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. Thank you for sharing. So that's actually all the questions I have prepared today, but if you have any other experiences or anything that you'd like to share, you can feel free.
I mean, I guess like there, I guess not for my personal immigrants experience or like Asian experience. I think like it might be interesting to note like my parents are both influenced by immigrations in their own way, like my dad was not with me for most of my childhood, but for him actually is even it's even worse. Between him and his father, he have actually never met his father. So like, but not like in sort of a abandonment kind of way, but I mean, I guess in some sense it is a cultural way. So like my great grandfather moved to Costa Rica at some point as a young man, because the region where we're from is really poor, and he started a business there, and then when he was more established, he went back to his hometown and he married and have 2 kids, and then he went back to Costa Rica because he needs to make a living. And then when his 2 kids were old enough, they moved to Costa Rica. And then when my grandfather, was old enough, he went to China, went back to hometown in China, marry, have kids. But he left while my dad was still, in Europe. And then he never were able to come back to China. He still sent back money. And then when my dad was old enough, or when he got married and had me, and then he went to Costa Rica. And by that time, his dad had already died. So I think he missed by about a year or so. So, and then, yeah, so that's also an immigrant story too, that goes back for several generations. And I think that's, not an immigrant story for, America, but is in the Americans, the continent. So, and I think that's, that's an interesting thing just to note that, that the Chinese have really, for various mainly economic reasons have, really been doing this immigration and being removed from their family for a very long time.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that and giving some perspective into that. And also thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed by us. And yeah, have a great rest of your day.
Okay, thank you. Have a
Thank you
good
so
day.
much. You too.
Bye.
Bye.